So in this lesson, we're going to learn how are the four organic macromolecule building blocks essential for all living things. The focus is going to be on carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. You guys have already learned their structure. You're able to identify what they look like, but now we're going to focus on what they actually do, which is their function. So before we can talk about this, I want to get some notes down about what organic means and what organic compounds are and why is carbon so important. Organic refers to living things. You might think about organic as like in the grocery store, which it means that nothing's been added to it, it hasn't been changed at all. But in biology class, organic actually means living things. So if I talk about organic compounds, I'm talking about compounds of living things. Organic compounds are compounds that have carbon in them. Carbon is super important to living things. There's a few reasons why, but the main reason is that carbon has 4 valence electrons. So that means it can form 4 extra bonds. We know that because in order to have a full outer shell, which all elements are looking for when they're bonding, the 4 valence electrons need 4 more electrons to have a full outer shell with 8 electrons. So carbon is really, really, really good at making things for living things. It likes to bond to itself, so it can bond with carbon. It can bond with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur. So that's why carbon's also really awesome because it bonds with elements that are important for living things. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So when we talk about compounds that are extremely important for living things, we're talking about compounds that contain carbon, organic compounds. In order to talk about the types of macromolecules that we need to, we're going to talk about the monomers, which are the single subunits that build up the larger molecules, and how they build up to form polymers, which are larger compounds formed from smaller subunits. So you guys know that mono means one, mer means unit. Monomer is a single subunit. Those were the things that you guys saw in this structure identification, like the monosaccharide and the amino acid and the nucleotide. Those are all examples of monomers, single subunits. So like you see here on the screen, you have the purple, the yellow, the green, and the pink sphere. All of them are single subunits, which can be then put together to form a polymer, which is a larger subunit. So here is polymers. That's a polymer right there because those 4 single monomers, those 4 single subunits were put together to form the polymer, which is a larger compound. The polymers that you guys saw were polysaccharides, which are made up of monosaccharides, single monomers put together. You also saw polypeptide, which is made up of single amino acids put together. And finally, you saw the nucleotides are going to be put together to form a nucleic acid. For example, a bunch of nucleotides can be put together to form DNA. DNA is the polymer. In your notes right now, I would like you to pause the video for a second and draw 6 monomers that can be made up of anything. You can make them any shape. They can be a triangle, a square, a star. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be like the screen has. And then I want you to form those 6 monomers into a polymer like you just saw on the screen. Pause the video now. Okay, at this point you should have drawn your 6 monomers and your polymer from your 6 monomers. So we can move on to talk about the 4 main macromolecule groups, which you guys are already familiar with. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. If you need to, you can pause the video now to keep writing down. I'm going to move on. So we're going to talk about carbohydrates first. Carbo means carbon. Hydrate refers to water. So that's why I always said that carbohydrates are referred to as carbon water. They contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in a ratio of 1 carbon to every 2 hydrogens to every 1 oxygen. So carbon, water, H2O. Carbohydrates have 3 major functions in the body. Carbohydrates are a more diverse group of macromolecules. They have 3 main functions. They have the function of being a source of energy. So our monosaccharides are going to be a source of energy for the body. Carbohydrates also are involved in short-term energy storage. There's 2 polysaccharides that are responsible for short-term energy storage. They are called starch and glycogen. Starch is found in plants and glycogen is found in animals. And the final major function of carbohydrates is that they are a structural molecule. And the polysaccharide that's responsible for the function of being a structural molecule is called cellulose. Cellulose is found in plant cell walls. That's why we refer to cellulose as a polysaccharide being a structural molecule. It makes up the structure of the cell wall of a plant. Okay, we're going to talk about the monomers and polymers of carbohydrates individually now. I know that this might be confusing, but the monomers for carbohydrates are actually both monosaccharides and disaccharides. Monosaccharides are a single sugar molecule, and a disaccharide is a double sugar molecule made up of two sugars together. We refer to monosaccharides and disaccharides as simple sugars. That's why they're called the monomers. The first type of the simple sugar is going to be your monosaccharide, which is made up of one sugar. You guys have already seen the monosaccharide, and the main monosaccharide that we are going to be concerned with is glucose. Put a big, huge star by glucose and write down glucose's function. Glucose's function is that it's broken down to supply energy. So where you have that space in your notes, right underneath where you wrote made up of one sugar molecule, you're going to write example, glucose, which is broken down to supply energy. And then you're going to put a big, 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 big star by glucose. Glucose is super important. Another type of simple sugar is known as disaccharide. It's a double sugar molecule, which means it's made up of two sugars. The prefix di means two. The disaccharide that you have as an example in your paper is called sucrose. That's regular table sugar. Regular table sugar is made up of two single sugars put together, forming the disaccharide structure. So we have glucose and fructose added together, and you can see that they're added together, they're bound together by the bonds. And let me circle this bond right here. So this bond right here holds together these two monosaccharides to make them form a disaccharide. So once glucose and fructose are bound together, we refer to them as sucrose. So this whole thing is a disaccharide. We call that sucrose, and it's made up of two separate sugar molecules. So on your paper, you have some questions to answer. The first one is how many single sugar molecules, monosaccharides, are in sucrose? So go ahead and answer that now. What are the basic monosaccharides that form sucrose? So you're also going to give me an answer for that. And then you're going to circle each monosaccharide. So take a moment to do this. Pause the video if needed. I'm going to go ahead and move on. We will go over the answers in class, but make sure you need to write them down because I'm going to come around and check. Okay, the polymer of carbs now we know is called polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, in order to be considered a polysaccharide, must be made up of three or more sugar molecules. We call polysaccharides, in normal layman people terms, we refer to them as complex carbohydrates. There are three types of complex carbohydrates or polysaccharides that you guys will need to know. They are called starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So each polysaccharide is actually made up of separate glucose monomers. And I want you guys right now to take the time to put these boxes around each glucose monomer and label them glucose in order to show that this whole thing is called a polysaccharide. So polysaccharides are polymers of monosaccharides, and this whole thing we refer to as a polysaccharide, but it's made up of single sugar molecules. So that's why we can call it a polysaccharide. Poly meaning many, saccharide meaning sugars. So there's many glucoses. There's actually 5 glucose monomers that made up this particular polysaccharide. Okay, now we're going to talk about each of the polysaccharides and their function in the body. Starch is short-term energy storage in plants. Short-term energy storage in plants. So I put a picture of a potato in your notes. So it says, why did Miss Shell put a picture of a potato with starch? And you're going to go ahead and answer that question there. Why did I put a picture of a potato if starch is a short-term energy storage molecule in plants? Pause the video now and go ahead and answer that question. Okay, next we're going to talk about glycogen. Glycogen is very similar to starch in that it also is short-term energy storage, but it's going to be short-term energy storage in animals. So I put a picture of a liver here. Go ahead in your notes where it says, why did Miss Shell put a picture of an animal's liver with glycogen? Go ahead and answer that now. Why did I put a picture of a liver? So the major difference between starch and glycogen is that one is found in plants and one is found in animals. Starch is found in plants, glycogen is found in animals. The last polysaccharide that you'll learn about is called cellulose. Cellulose is not involved with energy at all. So put in your notes, not involved in energy. It's very important to point that out to yourself because a lot of times kids will just say, oh, polysaccharides are all about energy. That is not true. Cellulose is not an energy molecule. So please write that by cellulose, not an energy molecule. Cellulose deals with structure. It's the structure of a plant cell wall. So cellulose is why plant cell walls are so tough. When you guys eat corn, unfortunately corn doesn't break down in your body because it's made up mainly of cellulose. So you guys know when you go to the bathroom, corn is coming out. You can actually see the cellulose of the corn because it doesn't get broken down by the body. In your notes, there's a picture, or there's a question that says, why did Michelle put a picture of a plant cell wall with cellulose? Please answer that now. And that concludes our lesson on carbohydrates. Feel free to watch this lesson over again to help learn more about carbohydrates. But for now, you're going to go to the next activity that I have identified for you in class.